I'm so glad that Brother Rudy was here earlier this week and already said all that stuff. But that's your priority. And if those three questions were not answered with Jesus, there's a problem. Jesus will have first place in your life or no place. You must love Him more than everything else in your life. And do you know what happens when you do that? When you give Him preeminence, when you give Him priority, He tells us this in Matthew chapters 5 and 6, everything else will fall into place. Everything else will be taken care of. There's a cost to discipleship. The cost is you and your priorities. Got to give them up. Got to lay them on the altar, as we sang about. The second cost, and then we'll close. So we think about the cost of discipleship. It's going to cost our priorities. But then secondly, it's going to cost us our lives. Our lives. Look at verse 27. He says, and whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Verse 27 hinges on that word cross. That's the key word. How his audience understood cross will tell us what this verse means. We need to go back that far because we have no idea what the cross means anymore. We are desensitized to the cross. It's on our hospitals, at least for the time being. It's in our churches. It's around our necks. We are completely desensitized to it because for so long, Western civilization has been saturated with the cross. It's changing. I shared that with you in the introduction. But we're still desensitized to the cross. When He said this to those multitudes, remember who they were? Bottom rung of the ladder. They were not invited to the meal. They were not prominent citizens. They were just curious. When He said that to them, it was probably just as quiet as it is right now. A chill would have gone up their spine. Because when they heard the word cross, they didn't think about hospitals, churches, and jewelry. They thought about death, agony, and execution. Death, agony, and execution. That is exactly what Jesus wanted to convey. If you're going to be my disciple, it's going to cost you your life. Now, I think as we look at verse 27, we can say that Jesus meant this in two ways. One, He meant it literally, that to be His disciple could literally cause us physical death. And I'm sure for that multitude that heard that day, who accepted the call to discipleship, who was willing to take up their cross, they died. The local government, the Jewish and the Roman authorities put them to death and thought they were doing God a favor when they did it. That is still going on today. Do you realize that? That being a Christian, the cost of discipleship for believers all over this world means that they are dying. They are dying, and for the most part, we don't care. When's the last time you prayed for the persecuted church? We don't care. Let me let you in on a secret, though. We're going to start caring real soon. Because that persecution, that life-threatening consequence of discipleship is not going to be in China or Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria. It's going to be West Helena, Arkansas. I'm 32 years old today. Happy birthday to me. I believe in my lifetime we're going to know death for the cause of Jesus in the United States. I believe that. I'm standing away from the pulpit. It's a personal conviction. What's the average lifespan in the United States? You know what it is? It's between 74 and 78 years old. Y'all got a lot of time to our elder saints. So if I'm 32 today and I say that I believe there's going to be persecution, life-threatening consequences for Christians in my lifetime, do the math. Take your shoes off if you got to. We're talking about what, 40, 50 years? That's a blink of an eye. 40, 50 years is not long. And let me tell you what's going to happen. When that time comes, for a large portion of the church in the United States of America, for folks in here, if something doesn't change, when that time comes, when there's cost involved in following Jesus, you're going to leave. This place is going to get emptied out. And it's going to get emptied out for two reasons. One reason is, like we talked about earlier, you haven't owned your spirituality. You don't have a real relationship with Jesus. You're living off of something your parents or your grandparents had. You're not really saved to start with. But people are going to leave for another reason. We're going to talk about this tonight. You haven't sat down and counted the cost. You haven't sat down and thought through what it's going to cost you to follow Jesus. You need to do that. You don't need to take this lightly. Heard somebody say that Christianity in the South is like our sweet tea. Everybody's got a little bit of it and it ain't all good. You need to sit down and think about this, that following Christ could cost you your life. Another way that Jesus intended this, and then I'll close, not only your physical death, but it also means spiritual death. Jesus meant when you're going to take up your cross means that you've got to die to self. I think about what Brother Rudy said. I think he was preaching on Tuesday night from Galatians 2:20. I got my notes in front of me. But he said something, it was so true. I was struck by it. When we talk about receiving Christ, we think about adding Him to our lives. That's not biblical. You don't add Christ to your life. You die to self. That's what Galatians 2:20 said. We're to die to self, and Christ is to live in us and through us. That's kind of mystical sounding, isn't it? What does it mean to die to self? What does it mean in that spiritual sense to take up your cross? Well, I'll give you some examples. To die to self means that you no longer make the major decisions of your life. What are some of the major decisions of your life? You no longer decide where you work, who you marry, what crowd you're going to run with, how you are going to spend your money, how you are going to vote. Anybody, you want to add some more? What's some more major decisions of your life? You don't make them anymore because you're not alive. Christ lives in you and through you, and He calls the shots of our lives. We're struggling with that, aren't we? We want it both ways. We want our cake and eat it too. We want to have Christ, but we still want to hold on to the reins, don't we? We want to have Christ, but we still want to be independent. It won't work. This is the confession of a struggling disciple up here. It won't work. You got to give Christ everything. Everything. Let me ask you this. Is Christ the Son of God? Do you believe that? The only begotten Son of God. Do you believe that? Wouldn't it be logical then to give Him everything? If you confess that He's God's only begotten Son, that He is in fact God, that He is the way unto salvation, isn't the logical outcome that you give Him everything of you? It makes sense not to. It doesn't make sense, rather, not to. Give Him everything, including your life. Folks, that's all I got this morning. Come back tonight and we'll finish this up. I want to ask you this morning, talked about two requirements for discipleship, the call and the cost. Maybe this morning you're receiving the call. Jesus is dealing with you through the person of the Holy Spirit. He's bringing conviction. You recognize that you're a sinner. You recognize that you're living off the spirituality of another person, and it's not going to survive the scrutiny of God on the day of judgment. Then answer the call by coming to Jesus. Or maybe today, for the first time in a long time, you, Christian, have thought about the cost of discipleship, and you realize that I hadn't been willing to do that. I haven't been willing to give Jesus the best of me, my priorities. It's time. Maybe you're not giving Him your life. Do you need to rededicate to the Lord? To resubmit as a disciple? If so, the altar is open. If Jesus is calling you to salvation, to be a disciple, come. If Jesus is calling you, believer, to resubmit, to rededicate yourself to being a disciple, then come. As Dr. Murray comes and leads us, and Miss Debbie plays, I'll be right here. Come to the altar as led of the Lord. I'll pray for you. Do whatever I can to help you.